Hello and welcome to this tutorial that will cover fly photography or fly fishing fly photography, not real insects. My name is James and I tie a lot of flies. You can watch them on Instagram under the name Once and Away. If fly tying is a hobby within fly fishing, then for me, fly photography is a hobby within fly tying. So it's basically a hobby within a hobby within a hobby. So is fly photography important for fly fishing? No, absolutely not. But if you want to share your pictures to Facebook or Instagram or something like that, you might want those pictures to be good. At least if you want someone to care about them. And that's the whole point of sharing your flies, right? So if you've spent time on tying a fly and you want other tyers or people to be inspired or impressed or interested in that fly, you might want to put some time and effort into photographing that fly as well. You need to resist the urge of grabbing your phone and quickly taking a picture of it while it's still in the vise or on your tying table or something like that. At least if you don't have good lighting. And we'll get to that in a second. Because lighting is key. So this tutorial will hopefully help you getting those nice fly photos. Photos that make your fly justice. Where you can see how you tied it or what materials you used. Simply making your fly look good. I'm not going to go into much details on what style you should use, what camera you should use, what kind of lighting you should use, because there are simply too many options. My goal is just to give you the fundamentals so that you then can find your style or what works for you. If you're here for the quick fix where I tell you all the settings, camera or lighting or whatever for a certain photo or how I edited that, you're in the wrong place. This tutorial is not about that. I will explain a bit about different styles like black background, white background and the freestyle stuff and flies that seem to float in midair, but I won't be super specific because there are so many ways of doing it. And you have to find your way of doing things. I'm not a professional photographer, but I've picked up tips and tricks from photographers so that I now can create the kind of style or the kind of photos that I like. So basically this will be my journey so far in fly photography. So let's start with the number one thing you have to understand. Light. The word photography roughly means drawing with light. That's how important light is. You need good light. So what is that? That of course depends on what you're after, but in general, daylight is a good starting point. On a day when the sun is bright, but there are white clouds covering the sun, you have really good conditions of getting nice shots. Or if it's early in the morning or in the evening when the sun isn't that strong. That light is soft and bright and the camera loves that. Clouds help diffuse and spread the light from the sun, creating a lower dynamic range, which helps the camera. Dynamic range is the range from the darkest shadows to the brightest highlights in a picture. Our eyes are quite good at dealing with high dynamic range. Like on a sunny day, we can make out details in the shadows as well as in the areas with direct sunlight. A camera struggles with that and loses either details in the shadows or in the highlights, making the shadows go almost black or making the highlights overexposed and white. The contrast between the dark areas and the bright areas is simply too big. Modern cameras get better at this all the time, but the best lighting conditions is still when you have a lower dynamic range, when the light is soft. So how do you get that soft light indoors? Well, the cheapest way is to take your photos by a big window during daytime when there is no direct sunlight hitting that window. Like I am filming now, for example. On my right side here I have a big window. That light from the window will create a soft light almost wrapping around your object or your fly. And if you want to lighten up the other side, you can put something white, like a white paper or white foam or cardboard or something, so the light from the windows reflects onto that white surface. I still take fly pictures by a window if I quickly want to send a picture of a fly to a friend or something. Super quick, super easy, and a good result. But what if it's dark outside and you have no daylight. Then you have to create that soft light in another way. The reason I said big window is that the bigger the light source is compared to your object, the softer the light will be. And a fly is in general quite small, which means that any lamp you might have can make for a good soft light, because it's probably bigger than your fly. You just need to make sure it's diffused, like the clouds do to the sun. You need to put something white and transparent in front of your lamp, like a tissue or a baking paper or a t-shirt. You can experiment what works best for you. Many modern LED or LED lamps are already diffused, so if you have a big LED lamp, that will be perfect. To get that light to wrap around your fly, you might want 2 or more lamps. Or you can use a white paper or something that I talked about earlier. And if you want to invest in dedicated lamps for your photography, there are many cheap alternatives. I'm gonna show you some of the lamps that I use, but there are many other alternatives as well. So the main thing I use is like this ring light. It's super cheap, and compared to a small fly, it makes for a really good soft light. And I usually put 2 or maybe 3 of those around my fly to get that soft wrapping light. The only downside that I find to these ring lights is that if you shoot a lot of flies with UV resin or a lot of flies that reflect lights, you will see these ring lights reflecting, creating small rings in your fly. So you might want to keep that in mind. And I also use these small LED tube lamps, and I've got a couple of these that I can place or hold to get the effect that I want. You can also change the color of these, and for this picture I've used one tube with blue light in the back and one with white in the front. Just playing around, trying to make a creative shot. Another kind of ring light is this ring light. It's actually made for fly photography because the LED strip that is inside of this, the light is directed inwards, so there's no light in the back, and all the light is concentrated onto a fly that you can place here on a spring load or on a stone or whatever. And that's a really fast and easy way of getting good soft light wrapping around your fly. It's super easy. It's also very good if you want to shoot with black background, and I'll get to that later. I've also created a similar thing where there's a LED strip inside of this, also directing the light just inwards. I made it for bigger flies like streamers and stuff, and it's also really cheap and easy. Just a white frame and a LED strip and paper to diffuse the LED strip. And both of these are powered with just a USB cable, so it's super easy just to plug them into a power bank. So start by experimenting with the lamps that you've already got, diffuse them and try and put them in different ways. Just try and experiment with what you've got before you buy new stuff. Play around and see what good lighting does to your photos. You're going to be able to give your camera better focus, better colors, and really give your camera good conditions to perform well, no matter what camera you use. And it's easier to edit well-lit photos afterwards. So let's move on to other equipment, and let's start with the camera. Most people already have a great camera in their phone. You can take great pictures with your phone if you know what you're doing. Some phones even have a dedicated macro mode where you're allowed to get really close to your object, and that should be perfect for flies. There are also these small macro clip-on lenses that you can use to get closer to your objects if you can't do that with your phone. I don't have a specific recommendation for these. There are just too many alternatives and phones out there, but in general I would want less than 10 times the magnification. You don't need like 15 or 20 times. This one has 6, I think, and it's quite alright. And if you use your phone without a macro clip-on lens, make sure you move as close to your fly as you possibly can. Don't zoom too much, because that ruins the quality most of the time. And also try out the Pro mode on your phone, if your phone has that, because that allows you to control everything manually instead of everything being automatic. You can change the aperture slightly, and you can change the shutter speed to control the light. And that can be a big game changer. I still use my 4-year-old Samsung S9 to take pictures of flies when I quickly want to send them to a friend or something. You can really squeeze out a lot from a phone. This picture, for example, is taken with my Samsung S9 without any macro lens or something. But once you feel that you've grown out of your phone and you want to get more control or more options to take better pictures, then you might want to consider a proper camera. Because phones do have a limit on how good quality you can get. A proper camera will do a better job. The first dedicated camera that I got for fly photography was an Olympus TG5, and it's a compact camera for adventures and stuff. But it also has a really good macro mode with focus stacking, and you'll be able to focus really close to your fly and get some great close-up quality that I wasn't able to get with my phone. But I still wanted more control, full control, because many things were still automatic on the TG5. So I got another Olympus, a DSLR camera with a macro lens. I mainly got that camera because it was very affordable, because I bought it used and it was like 6 years old. And it also had that built-in focus stacking that the TG5 had and that I really liked. Because one of the biggest problems with macro photography is the shallow depth of field that you get. You only have a very limited space depth-wise where you can get focus. And I don't know exactly why it is that way, it's physics. Check it up on Google. It has to do with you getting close to the object and the focal length of the lens and so on. Anyway, what focus stacking does is the camera takes multiple pictures with a focus in different places. And then a software within the camera or in Photoshop or other software combine those pictures into one where you get focus all the way across your object. And that can be really great, but I almost never use it anymore. Instead, I use the aperture to get a wider depth of field. And I use that out of focus effect to highlight the part of the fly that is in focus. But more about that later. So basically you just need a camera and a lens. A macro lens sure is great, but there are also alternatives like extension tubes or extension rings that you can use with your existing lens if that lens doesn't allow you to get close enough to your object. I haven't tried that, but look it up. It might be the thing you need instead of buying new stuff. Also, you probably don't need a new camera if you've already got one. I use manual mode anyway, so there's no need for fancy autofocus where you can track the eyes of an eagle from a distance or whatever. What I do like about my quite modern camera, it's made in 2015 I think, is that it has a flip display that is really useful. And you have a focus assist on it as well. It's not necessary, but it helps. Other than that, I just use my aperture to control the depth of field, and I use the shutter speed to control the light. And of course manual focus that allows me to pinpoint the part of the fly that I want in focus. And that's all I have to say about the camera really. I don't think it matters much what brand you use or if it's a budget or a super expensive camera, at least as long as it's sort of modern, like made in the last 10 years, probably even way further back. It's probably more about the lens if you're really nerdy about extreme sharpness and stuff, but I don't know much about that. So that's another thing you have to Google. But I do know that there are many videos on YouTube where a professional photographer has to guess if a picture is taken with a budget camera or a super expensive one. And the result is often that it's really hard to tell. So a recipe for a great photo seldom comes down to the gear, I think. Lighting, composition, storytelling, that is way more important. The next gear that is really important is a tripod and the use of a remote shutter, or a time delay on your shutter if you don't have a remote shutter. And that's because the slightest movement in the camera when you take the pictures can result in a blurry photo. It's not a problem if you use a really high shutter speed, but then you need really bright light or a flash. I don't use that. So my shutter speed is often somewhere between 1/10 of a second and 1/80th of a second. And that exposure is long enough to make it blurry if the camera moves the slightest or the object moves the slightest when you take your photo, especially when shooting macro. So make sure your camera is dead still when taking your photo. Let's move on and talk about some common styles in fly photography and how to shoot them. Let's start with one of the most common ones, black background. A common misunderstanding is that you get a black background if you put something black in the background. And that's not the whole truth, even if it can help if you have a limited space behind your fly. The real reason that the background gets black is that it doesn't pick up enough light compared to your object, resulting in that high dynamic range that I talked about earlier. The fly is well lit and the background isn't, and the camera can't make out those two at the same time. So if your fly is properly exposed, then the background will get black. And if you properly expose your background, then your fly will be overexposed, a white blob. And as I said, with this kind of light, it's really easy to get a black background because the light is directed inwards towards the fly and not towards the background. So if you put a gray t-shirt in the background and you move that so that it catches some of the light, that will result in a gray background. But if you move it so that it doesn't catch much light, the background will be black. The opposite to black background is white background. And I don't have a perfect recipe for white background because I think it's harder. At least if you want pure white so that it's seamless in an Instagram feed, for example. But a good start is to use a rounded paper like this. Round it and place your fly here, because that way you'll get rid of edges and corners and stuff. Then make sure your picture is as bright as it can be without the object being overexposed. In editing you can adjust the white balance to match the pure white. And to know what pure white is, you can either play around with the inverted vignette, or you can mask out the white areas and turn up the exposure slider to max. Then you'll get pure white. Then you can play around with white balance, exposure, whites, highlights until it matches that pure white. This can be hard, and the real tricky part is not to overexpose your object. And there are many other ways of getting a white background using Photoshop and such things, but again, Google it and find what works for you. Then there are of course many other styles, where you place your fly in your hand, on a finger, on a stone, on a match, on a branch or something. And I call all those styles like freestyle. And most of the questions that I get with my pictures is the pictures that have flies that seems to float in midair. And I've explained how I do that on Instagram several times, but I will do it once again here. Typically I glue the fly to a wire so that it doesn't cover any of the fly. Then I take a picture of it with everything set to manual, and then I remove the fly and take another picture of the background with exactly the same settings. Then I add those pictures as layers in Photoshop, and then I mask out the wire so that the background photo shows up where the wire was, so that the fly seems to float in midair. Sometimes I use a lot of wires and I have a lot of layers, but it's always the same technique. And there are many other techniques of doing this, but this is how I do it. The setups can be tricky, but it's very rewarding getting a picture just as you imagined it. There are a couple of things to keep in mind regardless of any style, but especially with a freestyle where you place your fly on some object or among other objects or things. If you want people to be able to make out the details of your fly, you have to have some contrast that separates your fly from the rest of the picture. For example, if you place a grizzly hackled fly on a grizzly neck, it's going to be hard seeing that hackle. The same will happen if you place a brown fly on a piece of brown wood. It might result in too little contrast and the fly might disappear slightly. In general, I'd say that you want people to instantly get what your picture is about. So the more things you have in the center of attention, the harder it will be to see your fly. Making sure your fly has some contrast to the rest of the picture is one way of doing that. Another is to make sure that only your fly is in focus when it's among other things. And that's easier to do with a proper camera. As I said before, I use the aperture to control the depth of field, where the focus is depth-wise. Since it's macro photography, it will be shallow, but you can vary it. Having a low aperture, which means a wide opening in your lens, will result in a very shallow depth of field, making your background and everything that isn't in focus very blurry. Having lights in the background will give you that smooth bokeh effect that is really pleasing to look at. The lowest aperture on my lens is 2.8, but I almost never use it that low because the depth of field is simply too shallow for fly photography, I think. By using a higher aperture, which means a smaller opening in your lens, will result in a wider depth of field, getting more of your fly in focus. This of course depends on the angle of your fly. Shooting, for example, a streamer like this places the whole fly within the depth of field, But if you shoot it like this, only the front of the fly will be in focus, obviously. As I said, I rarely use focus stacking to get more of the fly in focus. Instead, I use the area of focus to guide the viewer where I want the attention. By letting parts of the picture be out of focus, you will create depth to your picture. I often deliberately place something in front of the lens, creating a blur in front of the fly. That way you can get even more depth than if you only have a background that is out of focus. This leads us into composition of your pictures. I don't really have anything clever to say about it, because that's a whole chapter by itself and I don't really know much about it. But there are many rules of composition. The golden rule, the rules of third, triangles and whatever. I don't know much about them. I just try to give my pictures some sort of balance that is aesthetically pleasing to me. I don't always know the theory of why I like the composition of a picture, or a fly for that matter. It's something about proportion and balance that has to rhyme with my instinct. That's why I find most Perdigons, stimulators and booby flies ugly. I don't know, there's some sort of disturbance in the balance in them, for me. Same with some pictures. As an example of what I'm looking for in a picture, we can take this picture for example. I don't think it's exceptional in any way, it just has some of the elements that I've talked about. To sum up: composition, contrast, focus and so on. First of all, the fly is in focus. You can make out all the fibers because you have contrast to the background and to my fingers. There's also depth to the picture because I have my blue vise in front of the lens creating a blue blur, and there's a blue dubbing spinner beneath it, and all these things along with my fingers create some lines in the picture as well. So I don't know why, but I just think it works because of all that. Let's continue to editing. My main goal is always to get the picture as good as I can straight out of the camera so that I can keep the editing to a minimum. You can change a lot in editing, but your picture has to be properly exposed and you need to nail focus. If your picture is over or underexposed, you will lose details in those areas, and if you've missed focus, there is no way of recovering that. You can slide sharpness, clarity or texture or whatever to the max, it still will look like shit. So make sure that the focus is where you want it before you edit. I always shoot in RAW file because then I don't have to worry about white balance and colors and such, because all the information is in that file. There is no loss of information as in a JPEG. You can completely change the white balance, for example, in post. I edit my pictures in Lightroom, except for when I remove the wires and stuff, then I use Photoshop. I like Lightroom because I think it's intuitive and it has a great mobile version where I can edit almost anything on my phone as well. I also always try to edit moderately. I like that natural or maybe moody style, small adjustments rather than cranking up the sliders to max. One editing technique that I use a lot though is like a selective vignette. It often helps to pull the attention to where I want it. So basically I just lower the exposure slider overall, and then I put a mask over my subject and I increase the exposure there with the maximum amount of feathering so that it's really smooth and subtle. How you edit your photos is up to you. Find what you like, if you like editing at all. It's not necessary if you make sure it's good enough straight out of the camera. My only advice is be honest with your editing. It's so easy to cheat with Photoshop, making flies look smaller than they really are, for example. Especially if you use a black or a white background where there is no size reference. Then you can easily just resize your fly and make it look like it's sitting on another object. Or even puzzle together whole flies in Photoshop. So be honest with your work. I'm sure it's better in the long run. Lastly, I want to talk about inspiration. If you want to develop in photography, make sure to check out photographers that has a style that you like, or check out tutorials on YouTube, whether it's about lighting, composition, storytelling or whatever. Then translate that into your style of photography or what you do. Fly photography is actually just a branch of product photography, and there are tons of product photography tutorials or pictures to be inspired by. Make sure you widen your horizons and have fun with it. The more fun you have with it, the easier it is to be creative, I think. So thank you for watching if you made it all the way here. I hope you liked it and I hope you got something out of it. And I hope to see more great fly photos, cause I really enjoy watching them. And if you have any questions or comments, you can just leave them down below and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. Okay, take care, bye.